I'm John Tierman. I'm Executive Director at the MIT Center for International Studies, and we're sponsoring this jointly. And thank you to Hillary Rantisi for her hospitality here. We thought it would be interesting for our guests to get a cross-section of what goes on in Cambridge. So we have worked on other projects in the past, in Gaza particularly. So it's nice to work together again. Today we're going to talk about Turkey, and particularly the survey that has been done by TESEV on attitudes in the Middle East about the Arab transitions, about their relationship to Turkey, and so on. A very interesting and valuable survey, and the context around these attitudes, Turkey's recent relationships in the region, for example, and then we'll take your questions. I hope we'll have ample time for discussion at the end. Let me introduce our panelists in the order that they will speak. First is Mensur Akgün, who is the Director of Global Political Trends Center in Istanbul. Yeah, correct. Yes, in Istanbul, and former chair of the Department of International Relations at Istanbul Culture University, where he remains a faculty member. He has, in addition to his work at the Global Political Trends Center from 2002 to 2009, he served as director of the Foreign Policy Program at the Turkish Economic and Social Studies Foundation, which is TESEV, to which he is currently an advisor. Our second speaker is Sabiha Gündogar Senyücel. Is that it? Pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay. Is director of the Foreign Policy Program at TESEV. She has several master's degrees, I see, from the Netherlands and Turkey, and she is a PhD candidate at the Bilgi University in Istanbul. Our third speaker is Yavuz Baydar, a journalist for nearly 30 years, more than 30 years. You shouldn't really put that down in your biography. A journalist for several years. He writes opinion columns for today's Zaman on Turkey's domestic and foreign policy. He has a blog with the Huffington Post, which reflects his views on the Middle East, Balkans, Europe, human rights, free speech, etc. And he is currently the reader representative with the daily Sabah. He also appears frequently on television. So, without further ado, let us welcome our first speaker, Mensur Akgün.
Thank you very much, John. It's really a privilege to talk to such a distinguished audience. But before I begin,
a little louder, they say.
Louder. Okay. So before I begin to present some of our key findings, some of our key findings, let me thank to you, John, for organizing this event for us, and also to Michael, making it possible, and to Frederick Ebert Foundation. And this is fourth in a series of the polls that we conducted since 2008 in the Middle East, and the intention was to measure the reaction of the Arab public opinion. We began with seven countries. In 2008. The first report was published in 2009, and the second one 2010. With the participation, we enlarged the scope of the poll, and we included Iran. And for the last 2 years, we covered 16 countries of the Middle East. The current report that we are going to present, my colleague Sabiha will present the real findings of the report. has 2,800 has consulted 2,800 people, and except in Iraq, which was face-to-face interviews, it was conducted through telephone interviews, and with a margin of some 2.03% error. And we have found out since the beginning that the Arabs, contrary to our expectations, were in fact liking Turkey. And they appreciate Turkey much more than we were anticipating. And for understandable reasons, because of history, and I'm not going to go into the details of our explanation, maybe we can discuss all together. But the percentages were really high, and we thought that we made a mistake somewhere, and we double-checked and even delayed the publication of the first report in order to be sure that the findings were really reflecting the reality. And now, despite the decline, and all these in these 16 countries, the level of sympathy felt towards Turkey is 69%, which is quite high. And Egypt is next to Turkey, and followed by United Arab Emirates. And China, as you may anticipate, is the most liked extra-regional actor. The U.S. is not followed by China, but China is the most liked extra-regional actor. And the people in the region believe that, with 70% believe that the Turkish government is a friend of their government, which is also an important finding that we need to discuss probably during our deliberations here today. And moreover, Turkey is seen as region's powerhouse, not in terms of its economy or in terms of its military clout, but in terms of political influence. And that's also something which we need to discuss as well. And Turkey is seen as a model, despite all the talk and despite all the academic debates, particularly in the region, whether Turkey can be seen as a model because of the deficiencies that we have in our democracy. And they see Turkey as a model, and people also endorse Turkish policies conducted in the region with 64%. And they believe that Turkey should play more role in the region. As I said, despite the sympathy, there is a decline, but this decline is very much related with the general trend and also with the Turkey's special current relation with Syria, and because we are also polling Syrians, and the decline is related with Syria, as you will see during the presentation. Decline is also related with Iraq because of our love and hate relationship with the Maliki government, and decline is related with Iran because of special relationship Iran has with the Baas regime in Damascus, we presume. And with respect to other issues, regional issues, I would like to emphasize some of them before Sabiha elaborates them in more detail. The first one is, of course, Israel. 46% of the people in the region believe that, as of last year, Israel is the first threat to the stability and security of the region. And when it comes to Iran, only 11% believe that Iran poses any threat to the security of the region. So despite the demands, the WikiLeaks and everything, from the governments of the Gulf region, they don't seem to perceive a threat from Iran. Yet they oppose with 44% to Iranian ambition to develop nuclear weapons. The major problem for all of them is economy, both for the region and for their individual countries. And they believe that many countries in the region, and prime among them, of course, Syria, Iran, Iraq, pursue a sectarian foreign policy. And Turkey is not immune from criticism either. And moreover, except in Libya, there is a decline in the positive perception of the so-called Arab Spring. The percentage retreated to 52 this year from 62 last year. So there is a general trend in of decline, but nevertheless this should be considered as an alarm signal, if not by the academics, by the governments dealing with the Arab Spring. So I believe, John, I should stop here, and so that we can have more room for discussion, and Sabiha can continue with the presentation of the findings. Please.
Thank you. Let me also start by thanking, first of all, Mr. Mihail Mayer, of the representative of FES Turkey, for making this study possible for us, both the publication and the trip to the US. Thank you very much to Harvard Kennedy School and Ms. Hillary for their very kind hospitality, and of course to Mr. John Timan, making it also possible for all of us. I will straightly go into the survey data, but before that, a couple of general remarks about the survey. As highlighted, this is the fourth survey. We are doing it since 2009. Here today, what we are going to share with you is only some of the highlights of the survey questions. We have around 40 content questions. You can find more in the reports which are at the back there, and also there are even some questions that we weren't able to include in that condensed report, but we really asked some questions not only about Turkey, but also about the other actors, about the general trends in the region. So to start with the general trends in the region, it seems that the so-called Arab Spring is losing its popularity and it's losing momentum in the region. Last year, the people surveyed said that 62% of them said that they are more optimistic about their future. They are more hopeful about the future. This year, this percentage goes down to 52. It's Yemen and Libya stay still the same, and they are really at a very high optimistic level. In all other countries, there's a drop in the positive feelings. The most dramatic decline comes from Palestine. Last year, 70% of the Palestinians were more hopeful about their future. This year, this number goes down to 43%. And again, in Tunisia and in Lebanon, there is a more dramatic decline than in all over the other countries. The least positive ones are the Iraqis by 18%. When it comes to the effect of the Arab Spring, we divided this question into two. We asked the participants first how they see the effect of the Arab Spring for their own country, and also we wanted them to evaluate the same question and the effect of the Arab Spring for their region. As you can see from these results, I'm not going to repeat them, there is a decline both at the country level and both at the regional level. Again, if you can see the country-based divisions in the report, the Libyans are the most positive ones. They really think that Arab Spring had a positive impact on them. This is followed by Egypt and Tunisia, respondents from Egypt and Tunisia. And even in Yemen, there's an increase. So Yemenis are kind of increasing their hope, and they think that the Arab Spring had really a positive impact on their future. The most urgent issue of the region, as highlighted by Professor Akgün, it never changed in these 4 years. It's always economic issues. We again ask this question into two versions, for their region and for their own country. Economy comes first in both. Israeli-Palestinian conflict comes only as the first answer in Egypt and Tunisia and in Jordan. For the region, this year we expected that maybe the Syrian crisis comes as one of the most urgent regional issues. It doesn't appear so. It's only the participants from Gulf, from Saudi Arabia. They highlighted the impact of the Syrian crisis as an urgent issue for the region, but it's only 5%, so it's not that much of significance. And for their own country, even the percentage of the economic issue increases. It's 47%. Here, it's only the Libyans and Egyptians for their own country give the first answer, security, not economy. And here also it is important to note that the economic issues seem a biggest problem in Iran. 82% of Iranians give this answer. Last year this percentage was again high, it was 70, and this year it's 82. Regional power perception in the region. This is a question that we added for the first time in 2012 survey. So I mean, we don't know, we are not able to compare it with the previous results. This was an open-ended question, and 4 countries were named, as you see from the slide: Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Saudi Arabia is seen as the economic power of the region. Iran is the military power of the region, and Turkey is the political power of the region. Egypt's also named, but it doesn't get that much of significant leadership. On the sectarian foreign policy, this is also a question that we added this year. Not surprisingly, Iraq comes to first, and which is followed by Iran and Syria. People think that these 3 countries follow the most sectarian foreign policy in the region. And Turkey gets 28%. 28 might seem a low percentage when you compare it with 55-62. But still, here from this table, we can see that Turkey's, Qatar's, Egypt's foreign policy is seen equally sectarian by the people who are surveyed. The opinion on the following countries, this is one of our favorite questions that we repeat each year. Here, Turkey stands out as the most favorable country with 69%, although there's a decline. And if you look at the trend that comes from 2009, it's constantly declining. We started with 85, 80, 78, and now it's 69. But then I have to say that there's a decline in all trends in the region, in all positive perceptions in the region. There's a decline in 2012. When it comes to the question of how people evaluate Turkey's responses to the events that are taking place in the Middle East, and specifically to the Syrian crisis, 64% say that they support Turkey's foreign policy and Turkey's response to what's going on in the region. And when it comes to the Syrian crisis, 52% say that they don't have a major problem with Turkey's Syrian foreign policy. I was personally expecting a lower percentage for Turkey, for Turkey's Syria policy. It's Iran and Syria, of course, stand out that there's a very negative perception of Turkey's foreign policy towards the Syrian crisis from Iran and from Syria. Besides, it's doing so fine in all the other countries. When it comes to more specifically Turkey's role in the Middle East, 66% say that Turkey should play a bigger role in the region. 53% say that Turkey can be a model for the Middle Eastern countries. Again, there's a decline in the positive answers to these 2 questions, but still 66 and 53 are they are well percentages. And we have also a breakdown. We also ask people why they think Turkey can be a model and why they think Turkey cannot be a model. Why Turkey can be a model question, the first 3 are democracy, economy, and its Muslim identity. Again, why not a model? People again highlight that because it has too close relations with the Western countries, because it is not Muslim enough, and from country to country you have different answers. We see that in Iraq, in Lebanon, it is more Turkey's democratic system that's why people see it as a model. Whereas in Saudi Arabia, because of its Muslim identity, people think that Turkey can be a model. And when it comes to economy, Turkey is seen as the region's strongest economy in the 10 years. It's the 21%. Today, Saudi Arabia, by 26% of the participants, is seen as the region's strongest economy. And Turkey comes with 17% second when we say which country is the region's strongest economy now. Threat perception of the region, of course, it doesn't change again. Israel is the threat for the region. USA comes to second and Iran comes to third. It's only in Iran and Iraq Israel is not given as the first answer, but it's the USA. And even in Iraq, Israel comes to third answer. It's USA, Iran, and followed by Israel. The countries who perceive the most threat from Iran are, of course, the Gulf countries, and the most one is the Saudi Arabia. And the countries who perceive least threat from USA are, again, the Gulf countries. We also wanted to understand how people evaluate certain actors and certain countries' role and effect on the Arab Spring. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are evaluated to have the most positive impact, with 45% of the participants. Turkey comes to third by 42%. This percentage was 56 for Turkey last year, so there's a drop here. USA gets 30%, and this percentage was 35 for USA last year. So there's a decline, but not dramatic decline for the USA. And as you can see from the table, UK, Germany, and NATO are seen as the least positive actors. And 44% at the regional average think that the government of USA is a friend of their country. I don't think that is a very low percentage for the USA to get from country. This percentage is 70 for Turkey, 70 for China, and Turkey and China are the countries that have the most positive image overall in the country. But then again, here you see that if you look at the separate countries, I mean, like Syria, there is a very negative image at the moment of the USA. Iran, not surprisingly, there is a very negative percentage. Only 5% think that the government of USA is a friend of their country. So there are differences from country to country. Again, as you see here, Libyans are really think that USA is really a friend of their country. So there are variations between the countries, but overall it is 44%.
Sorry, can I just ask, is that, when you average those out, is that weighted by population? Or
Exactly. It's weighted by population. Oh, sorry. With that, I will stop here, and I will just stop with a note saying that, of course, this is a public opinion survey. It doesn't give us the whole picture of the region, and of course, it doesn't give the answer to all questions. And definitely, it needs to be supported by further in-depth and further wider studies. But I think, and we believe at TESEV, that still this is a good and valuable study, and because we have been repeating it for the 4 years, and hopefully we will be able to continue to repeat the study in the coming years, it shows us, it gives us a, like an idea of the trends of the region and perception of certain countries. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you for being with us. Thank you, John, and everyone else on whatever level to make this happen. We are very happy to be with you here. It would be, I think, perhaps useful to give some journalistic perspectives of what this survey says and what these surveys in general tell us. Let me give you my personal views. When we compare it to the previous ones, which are now 4, the findings in this latest report point to a somewhat turning point or disruption in Turkey's rise in Arab perceptions in general terms. The average in the region, if you look at it, has fallen from 78 to 69%, losing 9 points about Turkey. The sharpest fall being noted in Iran, Syria, and Iraq. The slowest fall is noted in Egypt and Tunisia. When we put all these together in a sack with the slightly lowered expectations on Turkey to play a stronger political and economical role, perhaps a cultural one as well, become closer to a somewhat cautious conclusion that under the stagnating pace of revolutionary or evolutionary transitional process in some parts of the region, particularly in Egypt and Tunisia, and with the eruption of the Syrian nightmare, Turkey, it shows pretty clearly, might have come either to see either its alternatives or to limits of its foreign policy capacities. A clash of dreams and realities, if you will, in other words. The Syrian part of the story in the whole picture has been rather defining in causing a sharp turn in that. It has pushed Turkey to impulses from the very beginning as it was developing. Sudden decisions, zigzags and flip-flops, underlined with constant hard rhetoric, particularly from Prime Minister Erdogan and Foreign Minister Davutoglu, and a strategic search between either continuing to remain a soft power for the radical changes that take place, as with Libya, Egypt, and Tunisia, but in Syria's particular case, whether or not a regime changer. This latter choice, namely a role that would mean a more intense regional activism in a more risky level, although it was not implemented fully at all, caused already a change about the perceptions of Turkey. All of these sudden impulses, changes, rhetoric, etc., had started to play an important role in the psyches of the Arab mind, of the Arab world. Part of the explanations has to do with this historically rooted Arab perceptions of Turkey as an expansionist imperial power linked with the Ottoman times, which already had been awakened amongst the Arab opinion leaders around the middle stages of the AKP's regional policies under Davutoglu as soon as he took over, and the so-called Davutoglu doctrine, but echoed even more strongly when Ankara decided to be the leading or guiding power together with Qatar when forming and arming the Syrian opposition. This has been also explaining to a great deal on Turkey being perceived increasingly sectarian along the lines on its choices for Sunni-based opposition. Also in its priority setting for choosing the Sunni segments for distribution of humanitarian aid and housing in the refugee camps in Turkey. In addition, this rather visible and emphatic, Turkey's rather visible and emphatic support for Morsi, the Egyptian president, perceived lack of proper dialogue with other actors, other political actors in the Egyptian political scene, has also been noted even elsewhere than Egypt, in Tunisia, Lebanon, other intellectual hubs of the Arab region, and for all those who follow their medias. Arab intellectuals, another point, monitoring Turkey's domestic policies and its process with the European Union membership process also played an important role. Several encounters of mine in Egyptian and Tunisian media environments during the second half of last year with the opinion leaders, colleagues, writers and scholars, think tank figures, they show considerable amount of sharp observations and suspicions alongside with some admiration and enthusiasm perhaps on the AKP experiment, notable in questioning of the freedoms, democratization projects and Kurdish issue as sort of shortcomings of the Turkey standing before its envisioned role and its limitations in the regional policies. Also on the lower profile, but important anyhow, all those see Turkey's ongoing struggle, very bumpy road for an EU membership as an important role endorser if Turkey still wants to pursue a powerful, decisive regional role. Turkey, with or without EU perspectives, are, as you can guess, easily two very different stories that will drive the perceptions either way, the opposite directions. Therefore, questioning on that one, especially on how the EU process is seen in the coming surveys of such, will be very important and much more helpful for us to understand how the changing region sees Turkey with or without a perspective of the European Union. Another open question that perhaps we would like to see in such surveys is the impact of leadership. Who is the leader on personal level with charisma, capacities, visions to lead the changes? Given the presence of people like Mursi, Ghannouchi, or Erdogan, it would be as important to see, because leadership in the regional context of such is very, very important, particularly from now on. Also, on a lower level, the Turkey's cultural role is reflected on this report. This part remains more or less unchanged, positive overall. Means that the sort of export of Turkish TV series, the soap operas, the Nightmare Mafia series or Paradise series, or from Bosphorus, whichever you look at, whichever your choices are, play an important role in many of those Arab societies. And it's a sort of a slowly growing on new kind of process, and which involves and engages everyone on the middle class level particularly. And this, I think, element will be remaining in the opinion level, and if not an upward trend, these exports are continuing. It has turned, and it has helped shape an industry in Turkey, TV series industry. Exports rising up to 76 countries now, with an annual income of $80 to $90 million per year. So this is something that will have to be looked at even in the future. A couple of observations I will end with how this groundbreaker element of Syria in the perceptions in the region, how it affected the Turkey's domestic scene, domestic perceptions as well. I think the element of Syria, more than any other country in the region, has played a dividing role, polarizing role. It sharpened the edges in Turkey. It's in that sense unique, because it is brewing in the Turkish social tissues, and it escalated the tension to new heights. It entered as a somewhat unexpected element, because very few people were expecting that this would be a lengthy, thorny process as such. So it's been shaking the psyches now, and takes polarization to new directions. On the regional business levels, on the bordering regions to Syria, on business levels particularly, which many people hoped would flourish their business both on the Syrian side and Turkish side, great losses of business created lots of disappointment, great losses of money, and it's created a sense of clash between, again, dreams and reality. On a national level, the Turkey's sharpening stand, ever sharpening stand vis-a-vis Assad regime, first was welcomed, of course was used as a popular tool for Erdogan, particularly in many mass meetings. But later, this led to, on four basic points, to changes in the psyche, Turkish psyche. Beginning chronologically, I think the first one was the miscalculations of the size of the refugees expected to Turkey. Miscalculations was based on ever-changing number of refugees and estimations of the government. And as the refugees got swollen in Hatay province, of course, this had also reflections on the rest of the country. The second was, at a later stage, revelations about the chemical arsenals. This was not so much on the agenda, but as the massacres continued and escalated, this came also as a sort of a shocking element for the Turkish people, that so many chemical arsenals could be so close to the Turkish border and brought them within the range. Third one came with the pro-PKK Kurdish formations in the northeastern, particularly parts of the Syrian geography, PYD, and also thereof the worries, concerns about separate Kurdish entity that could also in its turn affect the PKK struggles in the Turkish territory. And the fourth one, I think, was quite sharp and important. That was the downing of the Turkish surveillance jet off the Syrian shores, an element that also, I think, awakened many people to how close Turkey could be to a warfare with Syria. So finally, in my final points, from then on, the opinion polls show the resistance, increasing resistance for a confrontation, hostility between Syrian regime and Turkey, up to 65 to 70%. If you looked at the tiny details of those opinion polls, there were many of them. It showed, of course, that one reality, that Turkish people were proud of being sort of helpful to whoever was oppressed in the Syrian conflict, but they were opposing clearly war simply because they were wary of warfare because of the ongoing PKK conflict. And this was, I think, a heads up for Erdogan and his government reconsidering going further towards a regime changer role. Syria, meanwhile, continued to polarize the political landscape, turning Turkey's around 10%, 8 to 10% dense Alevi population uneasy about their own future. And CHP, the main opposition Kemalist party, largely endorsed by the Alevi segments, also more militant and vocal. It is certain that it will have a major effect on the changes that take place in Turkey's domestic landscape, and this remains to be seen in which way, depending naturally of the Syrian theater. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. Let me ask just a first question, and then I'll turn it over to the audience to continue. And this has to do with, I guess, the economic and cultural scope of Turkey in the region. I remember we had a conference in Istanbul that FES had sponsored, co-sponsored, and co-organized, and one of the participants, Hussam Zummat, who is an old friend from here, actually, was a fellow here, Palestinian, said, I wake up in the morning and my son is playing with toys made in Turkey. My wife is watching soap operas that are produced in Turkey. I go to a building that was built by a construction company from Turkey. What do you mean by economic influence? And it is very pervasive, I think. It's an economic engine, cultural and economic, I should say, engine of much of the region. So one of the questions, and then on the other hand, your survey results show that the economy, the economic well-being is by far the biggest concern of people in the region. So in a way, one would think that Turkey's popularity, favorable rating would be higher than even where it is. I mean, how do you reckon the things like the Syrian crisis, have they really brought the Turkish brand down, considering the extraordinary cultural and economic strength?
Shall I take the lead?
Whatever you want.
John, I'm sorry, you are right, and the economy plays an important role. If we hadn't had any economic relations with the region, probably we wouldn't have such an influence in the region. But on the other hand, in Turkey in 1950s, we were driving American cars, but we hated Americans. And our security was guaranteed by the Americans, and an economy was maintained through the American companies. But we hated Americans, and we still do, by the way. We only like them about 11 to 20%. It depends on when you ask the question. And we still have enormous economic relationship. The breakthrough when it comes to Turkey and the Middle East came with Davos incident. So Prime Minister Erdogan invited to Davos in 2009 January because of the skirmishes between Israelis and the Turks, and the diplomats decided that they should reconcile their differences, and the Davos was an enormous opportunity for them. But unfortunately, because of the mismanagement of the moderator, a very well-known figure here, David Ignatius, and Erdogan had to leave the floor. And because of other incidences that had taken place in Libya years ago. And if he hadn't left the floor, he would lose his power in Turkey. So he left the floor, and the Secretary General of the Arab League attempted to follow him, but he was stopped by the Secretary General of the UN. And this has been reflected thousands of times in Arab screens. And this has the main factor which has contributed. Turkey entered the Middle East politics via the most common problem, that's to say, Palestinian issue. And if we had a perfect relationship before 2008 between Israelis and the Palestinians, and we had a different vision with respect to the fate of the region, and we were moderating we were facilitating the talks between Israelis and Syrians, and everything was perfect, and nobody was paying any tribute to Turkey's efforts in the region. When we had this confrontation between Shimon Peres and Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Davos, late January 2009, we entered the Middle Eastern politics. And now, of course, there is a decline because we are no longer in a position to strain our relations with the Israelis, and moreover, it's not the major issue in the region, and it is sophisticated, and you need to produce sophisticated policies. But people don't bother themselves with the sophisticated policies. We are talking about the perception. And of course, I mean, these economic relations and all these TV series have produced immense impact on the public opinion. They perceive Turkey from a different angle. But if we hadn't had Davos, they wouldn't watch those TV series as they are watching now, with a different perspective.
Excellent. Thank you to our panel.